So then your parents leave the Sea Org. You're only 6 at that time. Was there some sort of a big shift or a shock for you transitioning from what you had known as Sea Org life to normal life, or what happened at that point?
Not that I am aware of, maybe my parents saw some behavioral mood swings, or I don't know. As far as I remember, we moved out to the desert, like in the middle of nowhere, Yucca Valley. My dad had a degree in civil engineering, and I do believe he still does. That's his business. He does civil engineering. We moved out to Yucca Valley. It was, was it a shock? I want to say, I mean, it was very different from what everything I had ever known. Like, I had my own room. I had, like a pool in the backyard. Like, my dad was making bank, $500 a week. My mom started doing she went to school, like broadcasting school, and then like she became a DJ at the local radio station. I mean, kids are really like resilient, those like, because they don't have preconceived notions, or like they don't think like, oh, this is weird, because they don't know, they don't have anything to compare it to. As far as, yeah, I mean, like I think it was fine. I mean, it's as good as could be expected, given the situation.
Yeah. So then from 6 until whenever, you just kind of grew up a normal traditional life?
From the outside, maybe. My parents were both ex-Sea Org members, like, intense, like high-level Sea Org members. You know what I mean? My dad was like an RTC guy. My mom, like, ran the class 12 auditors at Flag. So I mean, and they were both like devout Scientologists, and they raised us to be so. Like, we did conditions. Like when we got in trouble, we would have to do amends and like do liability, like reapply for permission to re-enter the group and all that stuff. Like, my dad would like whip out the old ethics book when things were getting hairy in the Crabtree household. But like, I got a couple spankings in my time as well. You know what I mean? But that's not Scientology, apparently.
Yeah, I guess it depends. I mean, I grew up a Scientologist. I got spanked all the time.
Yeah, like, I mean, as far if if you look at Scientology from like a purely objective standpoint, I think spanking is a no-no. You know what I mean? It doesn't
Yeah.
seem like a good reason to cause pain on a child.
Technically, you're right. There's so many contradictions, though. Like, here's another funny one. Tell me if you ever heard this one. I remember when I was younger, at the org, there was a nursery, and we would, all the kids would be stuck in the damn nursery. And the nanny, she had her own daughter in the nursery, and her daughter was a terror, right? And she would never, like, when her daughter was throwing a tantrum or just being a total maniac, she would never say something to her daughter like, knock it off, or don't do that, or if you keep doing that, there's going to be this consequence, because there's some part of Dianetics, or maybe it was even child Dianetics, that says it's very harmful to break a dramatization. That if a child is acting like a maniac and, dramatizing their engrams, you can't break the dramatization or you cause some psychic scar. And so the nanny had this policy of just letting kids be monsters. You ever heard this don't break a dramatization thing?
I feel like I've heard that before. Every cult has something like that. You know what I mean? Like, what random reason do you have for doing that crazy thing you're doing? You know what I mean? Like, oh, because Edward Hubbard sneezed in 1974 on like a lilac bush. Cool. Sounds like a great tradition.
I know, and then it's funny because you'll have people like that nanny who pointed to something Hubbard said as the reason why she could just let her child be a monster. And then on the flip side, you could point to plenty of things Hubbard wrote, particularly about Sea Org members and cadets and children, like in the later years, that would justify treating a child just as harshly as you would treat any adult.
Yeah, I heard a story about L. Ron Hubbard where he he put like a kid in the chain locker of the ship, like a 4-year-old, something like that. When I heard that story, like I got so angry. Like I had like a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 2-year-old at the time. I was like, if anybody put one of my kids in the chain locker of a ship, like as punishment, like, and and threaten them with like death because if the chain locker, like for some reason lets go, then you just get buzzsawed to death by the chain from the anchor, in that little tiny hole. I was like, that's insane. You know what I mean? Later on, I think he wrote the policy about like how 6-year-olds are babies. You know what I mean? Because he was treating the 4-year-old like he would treat an adult, and it did not work out well on the ship after that little thing that he did with the chain locker, apparently.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's what
I've heard that story too. I mean, I've heard it enough times that I believe it. I can't say that I know who the person was, but a lot of the people who were there at that time have told that story.
Yeah.
Quick question.
The internet came along just a little bit too late. Like they're like, there's some sketchy stories from like the 60s that you just can't verify anymore. They got to be true, like, or at least partly true.
Yeah. No, I definitely believe that chain locker story. I mean, I think Mike and Mike Renders told me that story himself. But quick question: when you said you guys lived in the Yucca Valley in the desert, that's California, right?
Yeah.
Okay. If you guys were living in the Bronson in LA, and your mom was the tech sec at Flag, the Flag is the East Coast. LA's the West Coast. How did that all work?
When I was 2, we moved from Largo. We were staying at, I think, the Holiday Inn, which was, I think, was going at the time, and then moved to Los Angeles, where my dad, I think, went into RTC, and my mom, did something at like hit level, like at the HGB, FLO.
Well, at that time, yeah, you might not. I don't know. I wonder if you've even heard this shit. So it used to be called the FCB, then it was called the FLO, now it's called the ILO.
What? They changed it again?
In fact, the new name is the only name that makes any sense. Flag Command Bureau actually did make sense at the time. Anyway, ILO stands for International Liaison Office, which is a better description of what it actually is.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stupid facts.
I'll do it again in 5 years. Like, okay.
Okay, so at what point? Okay, so you were living a normal life, quote unquote, but of course the life of someone who's living with 2 people who are basically high-level veteran Sea Org members. What was the next notable thing that happened in your life, or notable change? You mentioned joining the Sea Org later. So how did you go from living in the desert, wherever you guys were living, to what transpired between then and whenever you rejoined the Sea Org?
My father always said that he was going to go back in, and he never did. But he always said he would. And then my mom was like, I'm never going back in. I hate, all that shit. Not. She was still. She still like says, I am a Scientologist, but she doesn't like. She likes the way she puts it. She likes L. Ron Hubbard. She doesn't like Scientology. You know what I mean? One of those. So, but my dad, devout, always devout. Mr. like, puts people's ethics in, sort of thing. Like, to him, looking at black PR is just sheer insanity. I mean, who could possibly conceive that there could ever be any useful information outside of Scientology? How could it possibly be? So that's how that's going. And then my sister, she is a year and month younger than me. She's also devout. So we don't talk either, so.
Yeah.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe right here. Bye.